Welcome to the show, Anya. How you doing today? You're muted.
I'm doing well, Pasta, now that I'm unmuted, especially, and happy to be here with you.
Thank you so much. It really is an honor and pleasure to have you one of my first shows. I told the audience, start watching now. They can tell people when this show is getting 20,000 live viewers that they were watching the show in the very beginning when hardly anybody was here. But I'm using people like yourself to attract the good viewers because you are just awesome when it comes to Latin America. I know you just wrote a book on Venezuela, and you have a lot to say when it comes to the border crisis, which they're calling it the crisis, the populist right, and how that's tied to immigration. However, the populist right doesn't tie it to immigration. Before you give us your opinions on that, Anya, the other day I was on Crosstalk with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and he talked about it. He stole the words right out of our mouth. I know this is like something that's not new to us. We've been yelling about how our foreign policy leads to migration. But listen to what Dr. Leon has to say. Dr. Leon, excuse me. Listen to what he has to say and then give us your opinions on actual migration to the border. Here we are.
Discussion has never really been an honest discussion in terms of trying to solve a problem.
Have any of these issues ever been honestly discussed? Keep going.
No, because, for example, a lot of the data that they're using in terms of, now there's this incredible increase in immigrants crossing the border. Well, they don't talk about the fact that the manner of border protection and arrest they've changed their processes. And since they've changed their processes, that has resulted in more arrests. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's this dramatic influx of people trying to cross the border. They don't talk about U.S. policy in Latin America. They don't talk about the impact that American economic policy has had on decimating the economies in these countries, which are forcing people. They're not talking about U.S. policy in Haiti, which is forcing Haitians to try to find a better life. So it's never been an honest discussion. It's never been a serious problem. This is really just more blather and blabber for the sake of the election. And they're playing into what Trump, one of the cards that Trump was playing in the last election, anti-immigrant sentiment, racism, and xenophobia, fear of the other. So whether it's Russophobia or whether it's xenophobia as it relates to just a whole cadre of immigrants trying to come into the United States, it doesn't really matter.
Or maybe we could just, or maybe we can find some common ground here. It's just another way to spend taxpayers' money. It's just another way to print money, and someone somewhere will claim a political victory.
But I have an idea.
Go ahead.
Homelessness is on a historic rise in the United States. Unemployment. There are a number of things that where U.S. taxpayer dollars could be spent that would benefit Americans as opposed to Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and Raytheon.
Well,
I went on to say, Anya, we need to not just close the border, we need to close the bases. But that's my first question to you. Piggybacking on what Dr. Leon said, if we were to just close the border, whatever that means, I guess get sharks with laser beams, right? That's what they said on the Michael Myers on that show, that movie and stuff. Whatever the case may be, make it like Fort Knox, put it really fortified. A lot of military grade.
You mean
there.
So nobody knows what's inside?
Yeah. Make it like, Don DeBar said on the show the other day when we were talking about this, he says, we do that. We're making those people like it's Gaza. We're keeping them out and stuff. But will it work anyways, Anya, if we were able to seal the border across the southern borderline over there? Would it keep the people out to begin with?
It certainly wouldn't keep people out in the way that we think about it. It's not, I don't think, possible to secure and close the border in a material sense. But there is something that we have to recognize when it comes to this current migrant crisis, which is, yes, one element, everything that Dr. Leon said in that clip is true. Yes, there's no discussion of how U.S. foreign policy is a factor in driving where migrants are coming from and when. You can pretty much draw a direct line between an influx of migrants from a certain community and a U.S. dirty war or overt war. That's the case throughout history, whether or not you're talking about even how Koreans and Vietnamese people ended up as strong migrant communities in the United States. It always directly corresponded with an American war or a global war waged on behalf of the West. And when it comes to Latin America and what's happening now at the border, I do think that, yes, race and racism always play a role in a conversation or a debate about migrants and immigration. That's inevitable. And that's also why our elite love it so much, because they benefit from driving up divides and racial separation in the United States and making Americans feel as if they're under attack and that they're insecure. They also benefit from the influx of cheap labor, which is what this is ultimately about.
Anya, before we get to the cheap labor and what it's about, though, can we stick on your first point? I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think it's really, really important, because I made a comment before what you're talking about, the divide, and Donald Trump saying it, and Dr. Leon talking about what Donald Trump is playing into. Let's be fair. It's not just that Donald Trump is bringing this up for the first time like anybody has. He's actually feeding the biases that exist from a lot of conservatives in this country for quite some time. Is that fair for me to say?
Yes, he's playing to a natural sentiment that's not only felt in this country, but all around the world, in every country, probably, that has a nationalist identity or a national identity, period. There is an element of fear of the other, and that is pretty much a normal human response. And the people that are coming across the border, it's not like they would have loved to live life, a successful life in their home country. Of course, the way that media and politics function are to make Americans focus their anger and attention and resentment on those people that are crossing, instead of the elite that are really responsible for the conditions in this country and the countries that they're fleeing. And the point that I wanted to make re Trump versus Biden is that I do think, to some degree, when it comes to, well, I know that when it comes to immigration and migration, who is president matters. Even just in terms of optics or on a sensory level, people that are abroad that might be thinking about coming here when a Democrat or when Biden came into office, they believe that they have a better chance once they make it here. It's not even a question of whether or not the border is open. It's a question of, once they make it here, whether they believe they have a path forward to work and live in a way that is semi-legal. And under Biden, the reason that we're dealing with an influx of Venezuelan and Nicaraguan, but especially Venezuelan migrants, is because the Biden administration made a deliberate decision in April of 2021, within months, weeks really, of Biden's inauguration, to grant temporary protected status to Venezuelan migrants. And this was a demand of the Venezuelan US-backed opposition and the lobby based here in the United States, which I identify and describe in my book. But one of their main demands from Trump was that he grant Venezuelan migrants temporary protected status. Why? Because, like any lobby group, they want more people to come in, because that's how they gain more power. That's how they gain more influence. And Trump, though he gave the Venezuelan opposition and appeased them on every other issue, which is why we have the disastrous policy of him recognizing Guaido and taking sanctions to an extreme level, to the point that they even backfired against U.S. interests. But he never would grant them TPS, because that obviously would be something that would make his base very upset. And then Biden came in and assuaged the desire and the frustration that the Venezuelan pro-coup lobby in the U.S. had, and that lobby is really just an extension of U.S. foreign policy. They granted TPS to Venezuelan migrants. That is why Venezuelans all over the Americas began making the trek to the US southern border. And when I say Venezuelans from all over the Americas, that is a very specific point that also people don't understand. When we talk about Venezuelan migrants arriving in the United States, I personally, and usually this is what I would do in the past, I would have gone and conducted my own interviews and had my original reporting to discuss the Venezuelan migrants arriving in the US. I didn't have the opportunity to do that yet, but everything that I've read, whether it's in the New York Times, any outlet that covers the story of Venezuelan migrants coming to the US, and I challenge people to go look this up themselves, they will always explain that most of the people, whoever it is they're profiling, did not come to the United States directly from Venezuela. Usually they came from someplace like Peru or Colombia or Chile, anywhere else in the region. Now, why is that? Because another curious factor here is that if you look in mainstream US media, even The Economist, Western media, corporate media in general, they all admit within the last 2 years that Venezuela's economy has actually improved. The effects of the sanctions, the lowest part of Venezuela's economic suffering is behind them. And the peak of their crisis was really 2015, 2016, even up and then immediately after the recognition of Guaido because of the increase in sanctions. And in my book, I get into the specific details of how that happened. Like, I really hope that I believe that I demonstrate how sanctions are responsible for that crisis.
Mm-hmm.
But even so that is when Venezuelans that were poor began fleeing Venezuela to go, as I say, to Colombia, to Ecuador, to other countries in the region that and this is the thing that Americans might not understand because they're so used to hearing about evil socialist Venezuela.
Mm-hmm.
Most people who discuss Venezuela's economy as being horrible, as an American, they probably, unlike you, have not spent a lot of time actually in South America, because guess what? Life isn't so great in those other countries either. Whether you're talking about Colombia or Honduras, the US client states, life is terrible. And so Venezuelans think, oh, while they're in this, their economy is completely strangled. And I detail how that happened as a result of external forces in the book. But they in 2015 are thinking, oh, we live under because of media and opposition, corporate backed media is very strong in Venezuela, because they're inundated with this narrative. Oh, my country is this horrible socialist place. I should go to Colombia and no.
Yeah.
Turns out they went there and life wasn't so sweet. And then COVID comes in and all of these countries enact extremely strict lockdown policies, which completely suffocated their informal economies where these Venezuelan migrants were earning a living. And then some of them actually started going back to Venezuela. Venezuelan government has an official policy, Vuelta a la Patria, where they actually pay for flights for Venezuelan migrants to return home, because they're like, oh, geez, turns out the streets weren't paved with gold in Bogota.
Yeah.
So that, and then Biden enacts temporary protected status. And so what happens is desperate migrants living outside of Venezuela that are Venezuelan begin the trek up. And Venezuelan youth that are disaffected and struggling in their country as well also said, hey, this is the time to go to the United States, because I'm going to be able to work for at least 2, 3, 4 years. And who knows, probably get some sort of long-term citizenship. And so the Biden administration did directly incentivize this recent influx.
Let's unpack this over here, because this is so fascinating. Because and thank you so much to your outlet, you and Max, for helping me out in Latin America. Going to Honduras and hanging with the Libre Party was amazing. But sticking on what you talked about as far as like what people think, the socialist country versus the U.S. client state. In Bogota, when I was there for the first round of the elections, holy cow, Anya, the homelessness on the streets. I don't know if people had an alcoholic problem or a drug problem, but it was very much like a little LA, right? A client state. The only NATO Latin American country, Colombia, is got a lot of homelessness. Same thing with Brazil. at the time in Sao Paulo in that election. My God, the homelessness is off the charts. But you go to a place like Nicaragua, it might be a poor nation. It might be, might look more poor as far as the houses are concerned when you do see housings in some of those communities. But you don't see the homelessness there in Nicaragua. I think I might have saw one homeless person. Same thing with Cuba. I might have saw one homeless person when I'm there. So that kind of like rhetoric that the U.S. client states, yay, capitalism. And I'm not one of those guys who's like an anti-capitalist, anti-socialist, a pro-capitalist, a pro-socialist. I kind of have this open, like minded thought process about everything. I think there's a little good and bad in each one, but you're so right. Colombia homelessness, so much higher than Nicaragua homelessness. But let me talk about this one situation right over here too as well, because I want to still stay where you're at. And a lot of people in the United States. I was talking to my mom about Haiti, and she, said the other day, she said, yeah, Craig, I hear what you're saying. I know that we have bases there. Our good friend Camila Escalante from Casachua News would use the term occupation. The United States doesn't have bases in these countries. The United States is occupying these countries, right? We know that from Honduras, Manuel Zelaya, the whole 9 yards. But I wrote an article that I didn't release, and it was talking about the accountability of these countries themselves. Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega said, listen, Nicaraguans got to eat. Therefore, during COVID, there are no lockdowns. We're going out. We're keeping the economy. We're going to work. Cuba, however, Diaz-Canel, shut down the whole island 6 to 8 months because of COVID. Now, scared, it could be a bioweapon. It could be whatever it could be, targeted at the Cuban people. I understand. But he made a choice himself, I think, that was so detrimental to the people of Cuba. Granted, Cuba's one of those countries, economic blockade, sanctions up the yin-yang. I don't care what our friend Martha Bueno says. That was something we disagreed on. They are getting strangled by the United States. Nobody can do business with them. Even our good friend Donald Trump labeled, I was being sarcastic there, labeled Cuba a state sponsor of terrorism a week left in his presidency, which even further put a stranglehold on there. Anya, my question to you is this, because a lot of people on the populist right, there you guys go again, the gray zone, always blaming the United States for Cuba's problems or Latin America's problems. How much accountability should these countries have for their problems and the mass migration to the United States? Is it mainly about the sanctions, the war, the supporting of the murder death squads, the picking the dictators? Is that the main thing? How much weight should be levied here when it comes to being responsible for a country's own decisions that could lead to their own economic situation? Please go ahead.
I think it's impossible for me to say to make that measure. The only way that we could find out that measurement is if the United States stepped back. And I'm an American, so I can only really speak for what I think my government's policy should be, which is to withdraw, as you say, from, because I agree with Camilla and I agree with you. It is an occupation. Anyone who, for example, has seen the U.S. air base just outside of Tegucigalpa, the capital of Honduras, in Honduras would be shocked that there's a small American town basically built in the middle of this Central American country. And that is a military occupation. We would never allow for that in our own country. And that's just one example of the region and how, yes, as you say, there is this military occupation. And so if we withdraw that, if we corrected our economic policies, which honestly at this point we're only hurting ourselves, U.S. sanctions, the world has changed. It's over in 2023 and forward. When we issue sanctions, and I truly believe this, we're only sanctioning ourselves. I mean, we are still hurting people with this policy, but it's moving in the direction of us ultimately only hurting ourselves. And it really is at the point where we are only hurting ourselves, because even these countries have come up with ways to at least lessen the impact of these sanctions. They're on the rise and we are on the decline. And so it reminds me, when you ask that question, how do you weigh U.S. policy versus the independent responsibility of these countries? Those countries are not sovereign. And so we have to let them be sovereign. And it reminds me of a quote that I have in my book from a Venezuelan official who, on the issue of sanctions, said, if we are so bad at managing our economy, if we are so dumb and so inept, then why do you have to sanction us so much? Like, just don't sanction us, let us destroy our economy, because then the people would actually rise up against the government and change it. In fact, U.S. sanctions actually give the government more space for their errors, because people do understand and believe that the United States, for rightful reason, they believe this, is responsible for their suffering. Even if there is corruption or mismanagement, that actually matters less when there are U.S. sanctions. So let them fail.
Yeah.
If they're so bad at it, and then we would really find out the scale.
Yeah. Do you think it's mostly about resource extraction? No, is that why we're so heavy set on imperialism? Why we're down there? With the case of Guatemala, right? We understand it was the banana, United States Fruit Company, that became Chiquita and Dole eventually when they split. But literally, I think it was Arthur Dulles, who was the head of the CIA, somehow convinced Eisenhower that we got to go down there and take away this evil socialist who's nationalizing the banana to build roads and hospitals and schools for his people. Is it mostly about resource extraction to this day, or are there other areas in which the United States is so set, the empire, on holding an occupation in Latin America?
I believe there are, and this doesn't just only apply to Latin America, it applies, I think, to the world. There are two forces that drive U.S. foreign policy. There are the raw material, corporate, and financial interests that we know those are the people pulling the strings. Those are the people that own our politicians, that essentially elect them, whether it's the banks that ultimately own the corporations now that everything is so financialized. And that is what drives U.S. foreign policy, period, is yes, resource extraction and flow control of seas, control of canals, control of major trade routes. That is the foundation. That map, you could draw a map of resources in the world and how they get around, is what drives U.S. target countries and interests, and how, and that's the basis of it. What makes it happen, what brings it to life, are people like John Bolton and
Elliot Abrams
and Marco Rubio and Mike Pompeo and Nikki Haley and Hillary Clinton. All of these very empty, shallow, personally ambitious political figures that then become so ideological and so wrapped up in their own narcissism and their own hysterical worldview that and power, because they have immense power, that they take the policy that the banks and the corporations have laid out for them to extreme. And then they make it happen. Yeah. And so it is, yes, it's about resource control and it's about but it gets to a point where it is about something more than that. And that's where we are now. We're in pure ideology. And that is why our government is making such bad decisions, because ideology doesn't work in 2023. These labels to say, I think libertarian, socialist, capital, those labels to me in 2023 honestly mean nothing. What is China and what is the United States? We have communism for corporations. They have the free market of the state. And so when you start to frame things or think about, and when they're all connected financially and through multinational corporations, I think we have to break down these barriers and think, well, which countries are actually at least attempting to assert their own sovereignty?
Yeah.
We don't have that in the United States. Certainly not. We don't even develop our own resources. But I think that if Americans actually understood the question that the Venezuelan people answered in 1998, when they elected Chavez and beyond, as they embarked on their revolution, would most Americans support exploiting U.S. natural resources? Yeah, drill, baby, drill. But using that money, instead of saying that some corporation has the rights to the resources and the wealth that is beneath all of our feet, that we actually used that to provide the basic services of a state, instead of taxing, you and me and the grocer and the butcher and not anybody at the top of the economy. And instead of extracting that wealth from us, we just extracted the wealth where it existed. That's a model that I think Americans could get behind.
Yeah.
It takes getting behind these labels And that is what John Bolton and the corporations and the banks and all the people that and the forces really that fund such ideological figures like him, that is what scares them the most, is that Americans themselves would start to wake up to this.
Listen, we can grow our own bananas. We have all this area, all this land that's not being used. If we're going to drill, baby, drill, let's use the oil ourselves so we don't have to sanction Venezuela for their oils. But you also said something, too, that I want to point out as well, because you've been down to Latin America longer than I have. You've been doing this. I'm just a rookie compared to you guys over there at the gray zone. But a lot of these countries, it's all about, too, as well, not just the resource extraction, but our dollar, making sure that our dollar stays prevalent because they're using it down there. And then if our dollar can be used down there, we can hit these countries with high IMF loans. You know, the world banks, the national banks could tax the hell out of these people. And it is about, you know, making money on both ends, because the labor down there is really cheap to take their stuff out of the ground. And then we get taxed over here, too, as well. But I want to talk about the U.S. dollar, because everywhere I've gone in Latin America, the American dollar is still king. Does the American dollar have a lot to do with the occupation of these Latin American countries?
Yes, the U.S. dollar is the basis. When I say the financial networks that own all the corporations, I'm talking about the central banks. And for the last several decades, since the end of World War II, the U.S. dollar has been the center of the global financial network, and it is a weapon. This is all history that I get into in the book, and the U.S. dollar is on the way out. It's on its way out. There's no if, ands, or buts. There's no question about it, for reasons, again, that I explain in the book, and that have a lot to do, as I say, with U.S. policy. Our economic war backfired. Everybody would love to use the U.S. dollar because everybody wants, all countries in the world want a common currency, or at least it makes it easier if it's easy to exchange. In theory, it would be great. But we abused that right for so long. And instead of trying to actually create a financial system that was based on mutual exchange and understanding, it was, no, you are forced to enter in this network where you have to use the dollar. And if you disobey us, we're going to use the dollar against you. This is, again, I break it down in the book. Really, it's too much to explain here, but the U.S. dollar is the backbone of that financial corporate network that I described just now with you as driving U.S. foreign policy, without a doubt.
We're going to get you out of here. Just a few last couple questions. I'm very curious. A lot of these are going to be opinionated answers, because I don't know if we do have the proper answer. First off, well, this one's not going to be an opinion. You might know the actual statistics on this. Dr. Wilmer Leon said that he thinks that a lot of these numbers are being fudged. Now, you explained the whole Venezuelan situation, and there was an influx of Venezuelans coming across the border. RFK in his movie tried to kind of paint this picture that it's people are coming from everywhere, China and Africa and Asia, whatnot. But when you look at the U.S. Customs and Border Security's numbers, the high 80s, 87%, 86%, 88%, still coming from Latin America. Are these numbers being fudged right now? Is there been a huge, ridiculous influx of migrants coming to this country because Joe Biden is here and he's saying, come on over, right? Come on in here. And then you know how the populist right likes to frame this. Oh, they're giving cell phones and, you know,
right. I mean,
suites, and, you know, they're giving all these beautiful things when they come here. Your thoughts?
There is certainly whatever is recorded in terms of the videos of the border and the services that the administration and the states, local cities are providing for migrants. I don't think any of that is fake. I mean, I think that is real. The question on the numbers, I don't know. Is this just something that the media is manufacturing because it's a sexy political issue? And are they paying attention to it and pumping out the images? That would have existed anyway, and we'd just be ignoring possibly. That is how they operate. But I do, as I say, I mean, I can't deny that from basically my own experience talking to people in Venezuela and Nicaragua, that after Biden came in, there was a sense, yes, this is the time to go to the United States if you want to do so. When you have Trump in office taking a hard anti-migrant stance, and when you have someone in like Biden or a Democrat in office, people are just going to say, is it worth it to go up there and try or not? And I don't think you can, even if we don't know the exact numbers, it's just logically makes sense to me that yes, under a Democrat and now there is an increase, and it doesn't work out for anyone. It doesn't work out for people here. It doesn't work out for the migrants that come. A lot of them are abused. It's not a pretty picture, and it's not functional for their societies or ours. And so we need to get beyond just the partisan and divisive political rhetoric and actually just like grow up. It's not really hard at all to see what's going on. We just laid it out here in 30 minutes.
We got to get beyond the propaganda, Anya, because when Donald Trump talks about it, he's like politically smart, where he ties the migrants to like this Muriel boat ride, where supposedly Castro emptied out his prisons and his mental institutions and sent them over here. And Donald Trump has that rhetoric. You're sending us there worse. We don't even know who's coming over here. Drug dealers, the fentanyl is pouring over the border. Now, I would argue the fact that most of these people are coming to find a better life from the situation we created in their countries. I say you can't close the border until you close the bases, because that occupation is what's really driving this. But if you were given a couple minutes to talk at the UN, and this is the final question for the day for you, Anya, what would you do? What would you suggest that we fix this problem here in America and at the border? Because really, to tell you the truth, I don't look at it as it's like, oh my God, these people are just driving down wages. They're taking away jobs. I don't know what jobs they're taking away. They're doing a lot of jobs that Americans don't want to do. I'm thinking about why they had to come here in the first place. And I think that's awful. So I always say, close the bases, not just the border. But what would you suggest as a way to fix this problem? Last question.
Well, it does start with closing the bases, and closing the bases would be part of ending the phony war on drugs, which is a war on the region. It's not really a war on drugs for anyone who knows about it. It's the DEA and the State Department basically running drugs. That's what they've been doing for decades. So if we stop doing that, we would stop destabilizing all of these. I mean, to some degree, it wouldn't be a formal, like the U.S. bases that are there and the U.S. presence that are there are all to drive this war. And then it trickles down to the gangs that are working with us, coordinating with us. And at this point, it's not necessarily a deliberate policy of a foreign government such as Maduro's. But yes, when times are tough and there is an incentive for people to come up to the United States, it is going to be young men that are fleeing iffy circumstances in their own country just because that's the reality, and that they come here. Maybe not, to frame them as not the best and the brightest is unfair. It just doesn't capture the full picture. But yes, of course, the people that come here are the people that are more desperate. And I do think there is an element of yes, they're doing some jobs that Americans don't want to do, but they're also working in restaurants and working in homes and getting paid under the table because employers don't want to have to employ an American and respect actual employment law. That's just a simple reality. And so, yes, they might be having a better life here doing that than they would in their home country, but it just creates this ripple effect, and it's part of something it's a tower that's collapsing. And so if you just address this problem on the bottom floor or the middle floor, it's not going to change the fact that everything's crumbling down. We have to go back to their countries and figure out, just withdraw so that we're not making it worse, and also respect our workers at home. That's a big part of the migration or an immigration issue that gets left out, because a lot of the Republicans who want to play into race politics and easy border points don't want to actually stand up for American workers.
Yeah.
And so they can't be honest and full in their narrative.
Yeah. It's not a quick fix. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot to to get this done. You know, I think producing our own goods and services here and trying to close a couple of those bases and say, look, we can make it ourselves, American jobs, watch this. That's a big part of it. You know, the money situation, the resource extraction, there's so many things to talk about. That what a fascinating conversation with you, Anya Parampil. Check out her book, ladies and gentlemen. Check out her outlet, The Gray Zone. Thank you very much. But now it's time for Anya to go.
Thanks, Craig.
Peace out.